Hi, everyone. I'm Andrew Penn, one of the co-founders of Open Nurses, and I'm very excited to welcome my friend and colleague, Anna Osborne, to Psychedelic Chat today. It's 25th of April. Anna is a heart-centered clinical consultant, death educator, and a psychedelic nurse. She has a Master's of Science in Nursing in Complex Health Systems and spent years in cancer care designing and implementing research and systems change intervention to improve whole person care for cancer patients. We're going to talk a lot about that tonight. She's served the dying for more than a decade as a hospice nurse and a death doula, and she has a lifelong reverence for and attraction to mystical states at the end of life. Following her training in psychedelic medicine, she's been advocating for use of psychedelics and non-ordinary states of consciousness to support wellness, rites of passage, serious illness, and conscious death. Anna lives in Austin, Texas, where she provides ketamine services and educates on dying differently and responsible utilization of sacred medicines in her practice, Passage Projects. So with that, I'd like to welcome Anna. And if you're watching this live, I'd like to encourage you to go ahead and put where you're watching from and what kind of work you do, what kind of credentials you have in the chat so we know who's in the room. Anna, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. You and I met in person last year at South by Southwest when you were nice enough to come to my my session, and we had coffee afterwards, which is great. And we've stayed in touch since, and it's really great to have you here on the chat. We've got some other folks here from Austin and somebody from Detroit watching at home. So welcome. Thanks for putting yourself in the comments there from Northampton, Massachusetts. We got all the corners of the country represented because you're in Austin, I'm in San Francisco. So this is great. Well, we always start these things off by asking people, how did they get here? What sort of path did you follow to become a psychedelic nurse and death doula?
Well, I feel like I took the scenic route. So it took a while to sort of find what the golden thread of psychedelics was. But, my mom was a psych nurse and I kind of cut my teeth on her books. I was always kind of curious in the mind, and I had an undergraduate degree in psychology before I became a nurse. And I got called to nursing and enrolled in an alternate entry program. After I got licensed as an RN, I started working in acute care and hospital settings and kind of getting the exposure that we enter nursing and go find out what we want to be doing. And nursing always felt like a really good fit to me. And I struggled with some of the constraints of systems. And I wanted to be able to use more intuition and have some more spaciousness in practice. And I was doing some graduate coursework in nurse midwifery, and I was working in a birthing center when I really kind of lit up for the first time about the potential of nursing. So that experience of really being in a process where we don't quite know how it's going to look, or how it's going to go, but we're committed to whatever it takes, we're going to be here and we're going to get through it. And it's this powerful whole family system transformation. And I was so enlivened by that. And I thought, okay, now we're on to something. And, there's more for me here. This feels really good. And I thought I might spend my whole nursing career there, catching babies, but I got called to the other, threshold. I got called to end of life, and not really knowing why or what. I kind of followed that breadcrumb and I took a job in hospice as a continuous care nurse. And what that means is usually people are actively dying and maybe hours, days away from death. And there's something that requires higher touch and more care, and maybe something that's, an uncontrolled symptom. And so my first exposure to death work was months of just being at bedside with people that were actively dying. And that was such an opening for me and such a training for me. Still to this day, probably some of my best learning in my life. there was no getting around what was happening. There was no fixing it. So my job was just to cultivate deep presence and deep listening and really intuition. And it was also, looking back, that was my training in non-ordinary states of consciousness. That was kind of trip sitting proper, right? So it wasn't a rare occasion when there was a mystical experience happening. It was really routine. It was, almost daily that I was seeing these things that are just like, no one's here to talk about this with, but oh my gosh, I can't believe it. And I just understood that this is not a medical process I'm observing. This is very much a spiritual undertaking. And this isn't, I'm not just watching physiology. I'm not just watching, organ systems. I'm watching someone do really deep work. And there was some sort of commitment, I think, that happened then. I just felt like there was a role of being this bridge between matter and spirit. And I wasn't really talking about it. It wasn't part of, the hospice collective necessarily, but it mattered to me. It felt really right and true to me. And that was a bit of like underground work, this kind of spirit work that I was doing. I was kind of like having these private moments with people. And meanwhile, I had this other nursing career I was cultivating and developing, and I got a graduate degree in leadership in diverse settings, which is an MSN in complex systems, basically. And the design was, how do we train a nurse to bring all of their intuition, all of their nursing magic into places where they can kind of infiltrate and influence a system. And I loved that. And that's, it afforded me, the opportunity to be a clinical consultant in some really cool places. I worked for the state and for hospital systems and in academia and for startups and nonprofits. And we're trying to solve these dilemmas. And meanwhile, I'm still kind of moonlighting and doing this death work because that's really my dharma, right? So I'm a death doula and I'm still working PRN shifts as a hospice nurse and all these things. But also I want to design systems to help people with cancer. And I had the opportunity as a consultant to participate in some big cancer research, some multi-year, multi-million-dollar grants where we were designing interventions for improving quality of life for cancer patients. And, in those projects, we were totally omitting, like, we don't care about, what the diagnosis is, what the prognosis is, like, what's the chemotherapy, what's the radiation, like, it doesn't matter. We're going to do the other stuff. So if we really focus on mental health and spiritual health and complementary therapies, acupuncture and yoga, and we pay attention to body image and sexuality and, communication with providers, just all of the whole person picture, can we quantify that, there's some shift in quality of life and other metrics? And, over time, unequivocally, routinely, repeatedly, yes. And so this was kind of another thing I couldn't ignore or unsee, first this exposure to the mystical and the spiritual body of people. And then healthcare and tending to people's needs is so much more than what their diagnosis is, right? So how can I transform this scholarship into practice? And it's really hard to do at scale, right? It's really hard to do when you're working in programs that see 40,000 people a year. So I was trying to reimagine what nursing could be. How could I combine these things I know to be true? How could I kind of like bring them all in? And that happened to coincide with my own personal health journey and healing journey. And I got diagnosed with a hereditary connective tissue disorder, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, in my early 30s. And the feedback I got from my clinicians was sort of like, nothing we can do. Sorry for your bad luck. Untreatable, like progressive. It's going to be bad. And I just I really needed some more opportunities and options and meaning making from that experience. And so I decided to do a course of ketamine therapy. And this is pretty early in the ketamine game. I had I recommended it physician friend said, I don't know, maybe check this out. And, I went and worked with the therapist. And during that first session, I was totally blown away. I was thinking, oh my gosh, what is this? I can't believe that this is, part of the healthcare ecosystem now.
Mm-hmm.
How do I be a part of it? But also, like, I understand this space, because what she's doing for me right now, she's just really like holding this space for me. She's like holding all of these potentials for me and letting me travel and journey and transform.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, this is exactly what I do for a laboring woman. And this is exactly what's happening when someone is dying. And this feels
Mm-hmm.
like such a natural progression of like where to use these instincts. And I was talking to her and I was like, I don't know. Can I stay in nursing? Can I keep doing this? What am I doing here? And I had good fortune. This therapist was such an advocate, and she kind of saw the potential, and she said, nope, don't throw away this experience. Don't throw away the nursing career. This
Mm-hmm.
is all usable material.
Mm-hmm.
So she's very formative mentor for me, because she said nurses can get trained in this, especially if you have a training and a history with serious illness and with palliative care and with end of life.
Mm-hmm.
There's a huge opportunity there. So she pushed me towards training, and off I went to Colorado, and I went to do the PRATI training, the Psychedelic Research Training Institute, which was phenomenal. And also has a really influential, amazing nurse that works as faculty on PRATI, Chris Paternos, who was a really wonderful influence for me at that time too. And that was sort of the golden thread. I came home to Austin and I kind of knew, okay, everything redirects. So, the consulting clients now are going to be, based on these different therapies, including psychedelic medicine. And I am going to see, ketamine clients that have these issues, serious illness or life-limiting illness. And if they want a nurse doula model, they want kind of what I know and what I bring, then they can come to see me. And my death doula services became much more holistic and much more refined then too. But it was because I really saw the potential of what psychedelics can do here. And it changed my opinion about what caregiving can be and what healing can be. And it's sort of just like put all of these pieces together, where I'd been searching. I think I've been searching for something for a very long time, make it all make sense and put it all together. And it was a really beautiful moment for me.
Oh, it's a fascinating trajectory, and you've been swimming upstream in a bunch of different places, which takes a lot of courage to do that. I'm curious, you sort of alluded to some of this already, but what are these qualities that nursing brings to psychedelic therapy work? Because my experience, and maybe similar or different than yours, is that when I talk about nurses doing psychedelic therapy work, usually it takes all of about 15 seconds for people to kind of go through this. You can almost hear the gears clicking in their head going, yeah, that totally makes sense, right? So there's something on just even an intuitive level, people get that. But I'm thinking that part of our challenge going forward is going to be to articulate what it is that we're bringing to this space. And I think as nurses, we all kind of know when it's there, but you certainly know when it's not there, when care isn't there. But could you speak to that a little bit about how these experiences that you had working in childbirth and working at end of life really helped you to cultivate that kind of quality of presence, and how you use that now?
Yeah, I mean, the experience that nurses have in being with is just tremendous. Just being with this human experience, and including moments of the greatest kind of suffering and the greatest elation that happens in kind of the human condition. Like, we're there for all of it. And most of us have come towards the field because of this ethos. There's something in us that's, geared towards caregiving and is geared towards service. And already, like, the practice of nursing is kind of fundamentally holistic and like palliative. So all the time, it's not just that we're showing up and tending to the body, it's that we're holding space for the emotional experiences that people are having, and for the spiritual experiences that people are having, and for whatever dynamics are happening in the family system. And just the sheer number of hours that we spend doing that. I mean, there's no comparison, right? For any other profession, any other license type, the just sheer number of practice hours to cultivate these skills, especially that nursing intuition and just that human caregiving presence, is really unparalleled. And, on top of that, there's this, I think the components of this hardwiring towards safety is we're kind of the eyes and ears and the nervous system of healthcare. So we're always just tracking for how do we keep people safe, and how do we reduce harm, and how can we tend to the needs of this person. It's a very selfless, it's a very selfless profession. And the commitment to ethics, we don't make more money if the place that we're working, has a really good year. Like, the more interventions that someone has, like, we don't get a better cut. So the focus can always just kind of be what's best for this person, and what's the right thing to do for this person. And I just love the way that transfers into psychedelics, because in this moment of really like fast moving energy and lots of business propositions and lots of opportunities, I think nurses are going to be one of the sections that can kind of say, like, time out. Like, is this best? Is this ethical? Is this safe? Is this really good for someone? And a friend of mine who's a psychedelic nurse in Boston, also named Andrew, I really seem to do well with Andrews. He mentions that, like, this is the factory standard of nurses. This is how we come into the field of psychedelics. That's the baseline. Is like we come pre-programmed these settings.
This is our stock settings, right? Is it? Yeah.
That's stock setting, and like that's truly unique, right? I think that positions us in a really different type of place, where we don't need super heroic and Herculean efforts. We have already built this presence and this peace with suffering, and this ability to be with and to just love someone exactly as they are and how they are, so that they can complete whatever work that they're doing, whatever position that they're in.
Oh, that's delightful. I would love to hear more about how, we get this question asked a lot, and I'd be curious about your experience with PRATI and other trainings that you've done. But, I get asked probably at least once a week by a nurse saying, how do I get trained in, how do I get to do this work? So I want to pose that question to you.
How do I get to do this work? Just kind of basing this off of a number of like different things that I've been doing since I sort of, came out as a psychedelic nurse. I really believe that there's 1,000 different ways to support psychedelic medicine as a nurse. And I think it was one of the founders of Open Nurses that kind of coined the term that we're the Swiss Army knife of psychedelics. And we are, and there's a huge landscape to play in, right? Like, we have a broader landscape to explore and play in than many other license types and professions. And so I think there's an invitation, before like sort of putting a flag in the ground and saying, I'm going to do this thing in psychedelics, that nurses can take the time to get really curious about where they'd like to be and what lights them up and what feels like maybe their highest service. Because there's sort of like, there's an area in psychedelics for that. And there's a way to even like customize this nursing trajectory into psychedelics. So get curious about what you want to be doing and where you want to point your compass and where you'd like to be working 5 years from now. What, what environment would you like to be working in, and what population, and for what indications, and what medicine. And that's kind of a place where you can start, I think, to determine what type of maybe trainings or exposures to get.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it can be really useful to just get a foot in the door and start almost doing this environmental scan of what's going on and where the opportunities are. So that may be as simple as joining your psychedelic societies, or joining a consultation group, or starting to talk to other professionals that are doing this about what your interest is and what your background is, and trying to figure out how that might be kind of useful to the field at large. But as far as trainings, it's sort of, your training is going to create your reality. And so choosing the right training, not to put too much pressure on it, but it is something I think is worth a little bit of consideration. So if you know right away that, you'd like to enter psychedelics effective immediately, and, ketamine being the tool that we can use now, then what might be useful to get into the ketamine game? And usually that's a ketamine training, or at least some experientials. So I thought PRATI was very useful for me. It was a multi-day training. They have this really beautiful and broad approach, which is kind of returning to the sacred. So it's not strictly about something like protocols. It's about designing the care systems around psychedelic medicine and why we're doing it. But there's other ketamine training opportunities, Polaris, Ketamine Research Foundation, I think IPI, there's a number. So thinking about what's the medicine that can help to kind of direct the judgment, and what's the environment I want to be working in. It may not be a multi-year long-term commitment to just kind of get doing the work. I think starting to do the work faster, starting to figure out what's going on, might be more beneficial than having a credential or a certificate or something else. I think just starting to be in the realm of people that are doing psychedelic work is very helpful.
Yeah. And I appreciate you advocating for allowing this sort of process to unfold, and to put yourself in these spaces, but not feel like there's an urgency that you have to go get this credential, today, that you can wait and see what feels right, what you're called to. And I feel like I'd be curious your thoughts on this. It feels like there's a lot of urgency in the space right now, and there's a lot of sort of fear that if you don't do this right now, you're somehow going to get left behind. And I can understand that, but I'm curious of your thoughts about the urgency piece.
Well, I mean, again, from my own experiences, like if you kind of rush to sort of like get there first, or make a rush decision about what feels right, you usually end up in the wrong place. Right? So like it can be kind of detrimental to try and do faster. And, there's not just psychedelic training proper that can be one of the tools that sort of gets you into this psychedelic space. There's a number of psychedelic adjacent options that nurses can pursue. So, before deciding, I'm going to go become a nurse practitioner, going to get my psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner, or become advanced practice so I can prescribe, or on and on and on. Like, what if you could just support clients that were doing psychedelic therapy elsewhere? What if you could be doing integration, or what if you could be doing things like body work, or some sort of somatic therapies, or breath work, or the suite of holistic therapies that nurses are often really involved in. We just happen to have these side interests. And, I happen to also like be a yoga instructor, and I understand breath work, and I'm an herbalist, and there's this opportunity for like customization almost, and specialties and subspecialties. And so you don't necessarily have to be facilitating a journey to be working with, working in the psychedelic arena.
Yeah.
So I think just getting curious about what what sort of lights you up, and what type of healing arts you want to be involved in can be a really useful place to start.
Yeah, it'd be an interesting question to ask ourselves of, how would we be facilitating this nursing task if it were psychedelically informed? What does a psychedelic dressing change look like? What is psychedelic wound care look like? I mean, as weird as that sounds, right? I mean, obviously we're not pre-dosing people with psilocybin before we debride their wound, but could we be present in a different way while we're doing that? That is informed by the work that we're doing with psychedelics. I mean, it's just that question of how will psychedelics change nursing? Not just how nursing will change psychedelics, but how will psychedelics change nursing?
Totally.
I mean, for me, it kind of got me back to my roots. It was like I'd sort of gotten away from that quality of presence stuff, and I'd gotten a little kind of technocratic, and it's been a good reminder to kind of come back to those foundations about quality of presence and such.
Yeah, and we can only imagine what 10 years from now, after the nurse and labor force has also been utilizing these these therapies and these practices. Like caregiving 2.0 is on the horizon, and I think it'll be nurses that are kind of modeling what it can be.
Yeah, and honestly, they're going to need our numbers too, because we're already licensed, and everyone's talking about we need 50 to 100,000 clinicians to be doing this work, and it takes a long time to train a therapist. Where are you going to find these folks? But there's 4 million of us in the U.S. So just take 1% of us, and you've got a ready-made workforce of 40,000 people right there. So some of the programs that you talked about have I don't know if PRATI does, but I know some of the ketamine training programs have an experiential component. So there is an opportunity, usually I don't think required, but available if people want to have their own experience, say with ketamine. And I know this is kind of a delicate question because, we are all licensed by boards who are often not particularly forward thinking, shall we be polite about it, and might see the use of something like a psychedelic that is a scheduled substance as some kind of substance, as an admission of some kind of substance use problem. And I think we all know nurses who have had problems with their boards because of substance use issues, and nobody wants to be in those crosshairs. So what are your thoughts well, first of all, what are your thoughts about the necessity of a psychedelic clinician having their own psychedelic experiences in some form or another? And then how do you think about navigating that delicate space between that world and then the world of the nursing boards, which is often much more concrete and far less progressive?
Well, I think, and not just I'm speaking from my personal opinion, but also there seems to be a bit of consensus that familiarity with non-ordinary states of consciousness is essential for doing this work. So, I mean, mystics throughout history, were they always using psychedelics? No. Well, there's lots of different roads to altered state, whether breath work or fasting or meditation. But I think to support clients that are having this experience, familiarity with what that is like, reaching this unitive experience or non-dual experience or an egoless experience, the importance of that can't be overstated. And it's not just about what happens during the journey. It's about all of the things that come after that, because sometimes that's where it gets really squirrely. Like psychedelic experience will give you the clues, and the school of life kind of reinforces the lessons. And that's hard. That's where the labor happens.
Yeah.
And I think if we're to support people responsibly and to support people without pathologizing their experiences, we have to have gone through those things ourselves. So, the getting there, the doing that is a personal decision, and it can be done perfectly legally. It can be done through ketamine experientials. For psilocybin experientials. People can go to Canada, can go to Jamaica, can go to Mexico. There's a number of ways if it feels like that's the best way to be a good guardian of your license, right? But I think, like, I don't expect the board to be different than the board is, right? Like, the board is still going to maintain, what they're supposed to be doing, and we need them to be doing that. That's wonderful. That's a safety-oriented thing. So for me, like, if I think about sort of how I handle, discussing my own experiences and my own sort of credibility and building rapport with people and answering questions, there's a lot of ways that we can answer these questions responsibly and consider the context and consider the audience and utilize nursing intuition and judgment when we're answering without kind of putting ourselves at risk. And we have a lot of, we're the most trusted profession. And so when people are asking us these things, it's because they have questions about, is it safe? Does this have any staying power? Is this really effective? What's the deal? It's not necessarily about what is your particular behavior. It's like, what do you think about this? And, so I try and zoom out a little bit if I get sort of questions like that, and think about what kind of lighthouse I want to be and what I'd like people to know, like what would I really like to share with people. And I want to use my credibility tokens wisely, right? And so I share things like, it's easy to talk about the research, right? You can redirect sometimes and just talk about what research is showing. And here's what's happening in the world of, MDMA approval pathways. And here's what's happening with ayahuasca. And here's what's happening with psilocybin. And here's what's already going on with ketamine. And here's how ibogaine is being used. And letting, people kind of go investigate and go follow their curiosity and go, learn what's happening right now. Because it's not about what I do or about what I think. It's about this new wave of, interventions that can help people. There are some things that I can share really openly and publicly. And, for my ketamine clients, I'm very open that I've done courses of ketamine, because that's just part of my credibility building and rapport building with people. I think that's very important for them to know. And of course, I'm also really open to sharing other experiences about alternative health endeavors that have been fruitful for me. So I work with a indigenous healer. I'm a student of an indigenous healer at Kyoto, and work with non-psychoactive medicines. And that's been a quantum leap in my own personal health journey. And so that's the kind of lighthouse I want to be. I want to talk about those things. I want to promote those things. I want other people to be aware that these options exist.
Right.
And, what I find is, like, a trip report is not what people are asking for. Right? A trip report is not the best resource to give to people, but real information, so that they can get curious and so they can make informed choices for themselves and kind of understand the potentials. I think that's how we can kind of handle this in between, pre-legalization, pre-approval territory.
Yeah. Just a reminder, if people have questions for Anna, they can put them into the chat, and we'll get to them in the last 20 minutes or so in the last 20 minutes of our time together here. There's something, I also feel like there's something that we don't necessarily need to be explicit about talking about our experiences, that they're just kind of conveyed in the way that I always say that our patients are always assessing us as much as we're assessing them. But they're assessing for something different. We're assessing for their symptoms and their diagnosis and whatnot, but they're assessing for safety and credibility. And can I tell this, if I share this with this person, are they going to think ill of me, or are they going to accept me? And if you've had personal experiences, even if you don't say them out loud, that seems to be conveyed in some way,
Absolutely.
And the personal experience maybe of psychedelics, or maybe of your own psychiatric issues, or your own experiences with somebody dying. You don't necessarily have to say it out loud, but
Right.
it's just communicated sort of interstitially, right?
Yeah, so much of that, just the way we can use, even just like body language, we can essentially hide in plain sight and communicate everything we need to communicate with the people that are asking us the questions that need to be
Yeah.
answered.
Yeah, I used to keep kind of obscure drug books like P-Call and T-Call in my office at eye level intentionally. So
So subtle.
every once in a while, somebody would look at that and be like, like
A nod, right?
a nod, and then it's a tell, right? It's a tell, but
Yeah, we
it's
could also develop a secret handshake. I don't know if anyone's
right.
working on that, but
We'll have to get to work on that. So you do some heavy work. You've worked with dying people. And I think all of us who are nurses have had non-nurses say to us, "Oh my God, I could never do the work that you do. It's so intense." And but and it is intense. And part of what I think we have to grapple with sometimes is that, like, we sit with a lot of difficult stuff, right? And so I'm wondering, I really kind of don't like the term self-care, because it just feels very well, I have a lot of things to say about it, but I won't bore you with them. But how do you tend to your own well-being, and to not carry around all the things all the suffering that you witness in your work? Because I think we all know there's a lot of suffering that we engage in. So what's your relationship like with that, and how do you manage that?
I mean, full disclosure, like in my nursing career, I've burned out plenty of times, right? I've really like encountered empathic distress in a very direct way, and I've had to come and go and renegotiate. And so at this point, I have a different type of devotion to my own wellness. And I'm always kind of learning and evolving and practicing there. But it comes down to, I think, making really conscious decisions about my schedule and my comfort with workload. Like, how often do I want to do psychedelic work with people? How many end of life clients can I manage at one time? Do I want to be on call? Like, can I handle the taxation on my body when that happens? And I'm building a sustainable clip for myself now, right? So I will see clients, I'll do journeys on a couple days of the week, and I will see, death clients in certain hours of the day, but not throughout the night and not 7 days a week. And it's okay to have some parameters there. And, just getting really honest about energetic hygiene and spiritual hygiene, and being devoted to it and committed to it, and kind of not letting that slip up. And so for me, that's maintaining my practices every day, especially around serious work that I'm doing, especially around psychedelic journeys, and especially around, an active death kind of scenario. When we're in it, we're really going deep into it with someone. You can't do that without kind of getting some artifacts from it, without getting some of that material in you and on you. And I mean, that's the commitment we make, is we're in the deep end too. We're here with you. We're being with your suffering. And one of the things that I've been practicing recently is just getting better about ritual around kind of closing the container after interactions that are really energetically or spiritually taxing.
Tell us about that. Yeah. What's that look like?
So, well, I mean, what it looks like today, some things I kind of started when I was first doing death work and have continued to refine. But, after a session ends, like I want ritual, I want demarcation to kind of close the blinds, right? So I am sweeping my body. I'm physically sweeping my body, or, blowing air, like moving my body. going into the bathroom and washing my hands as ritual, so that, it's just something that an intuitive says she does between all of her clients. Okay, now I wash my hands and I just let any energies kind of, release and close. And, Joan Halifax, I read this book recently that left an impression on me, called Standing at the Edge. And Joan Halifax is an American Zen Buddhist teacher, a humanitarian. She's like gone to the hardest of the hardest hard environments. And, she's got this resilience, and she teaches sustainability. She teaches about how to endure the edge state of empathy. With empathy is always perched precariously between gift and invasion, right?
Wait, say that again. I want to catch that.
This is from her book. Empathy is always perched precariously between gift and invasion.
Ooh.
So, right. Wow. So it's the sword's edge, right? It's the sword's edge to go into these situations with people. And one of the models that she teaches, the acronym is GRACE. And I wouldn't get it right to go through all of the letters, but in essence, it's, you ground first, and you are then able to show up fully with compassion and use your discernment to kind of offer what this human is needing in that moment. And after you engage with them, then you end the interaction, right? So you can energetically, psychically end the interaction. You can, put compassion towards yourself. You can have some acknowledgement or some awareness of, that was really hard. That was some big work. Like that was a doozy. And then you go home to your normal life, and you lay on the couch and you watch Little House on the Prairie, and you don't think about it anymore, because it just doesn't work otherwise. Yeah. And I think, as more providers, in this kind of post-COVID era, and as we're doing more essentially spirit work with people, and we're doing psychedelic work with people, and we're changing death work with people, just supporting one another, providers supporting one another, and talking about, what are your energetic hygiene practices? What works for you? How do you shake it off? And how do you decompress? And can I call you after a really bad one? Like that. That's a really important part of my self-care too. It's just decompression back to baseline.
I love that. Yeah. Sometimes we just need a little Netflix therapy afterwards. Well, I mean, let me go off script for a second here and ask you, since you've spent a lot of time with people at the end of their lives, what would a good death look like to you? What would you want for your own?
Oh, for mine.
Yeah.
Okay, I love the way you phrase that, because the terminology of good death it's so subjective, right?
Sure.
So you can't formulate the idea of a good death because it's so variable.
Yeah, tell me about yours.
Cool. It's a cool question. For me, a good death would look like lots of space to be in my humanity. So it would be lots of space to explore, the deepest incarnation of my humanity, to explore the depths of the terror, and to follow the parts that feel beautiful, and to just let people, have the people around me let me do it, right? This unencumbered sort of invitation to go seek here. What is this about? This great mystery that none of us really understand. Go do some investigation and report back. I think I would like the opportunity to be honest about it, and to be including others in the process, and to not have it be an isolated experience. And choice. I would like a lot of choice in how it goes, and what I do, and what feels right for me. I would want a family system that authorizes that full choice, and kind of holds that torch for me, and allows that, and fights for that reality. And I would like a lot of spiritual autonomy, whatever it looks like, just spiritual autonomy. Give me the room and the space to be in this in between, like whatever this, portals opening and new sensibilities and like visitations and all the mystical, magical stuff. Like, let me have my full experience. I want to be in it all the way. I want to be able to walk towards it. I want to have curiosity about it. And I don't want it to be prescribed. And I don't want anyone to tell me how to do it. And I surely don't want anyone to have a solution for what I'm going through. I can see myself being the crankiest old lady. If a young, healthy person comes into my room and says, I know just what you need here, you're getting kicked out. You can't.
I'm going to be that patient. Yep, that's right. That's right.
You just don't get it. Like, we don't get it.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to what you're saying about what Joan Halifax said around empathy. That what was the line? It straddles the space between a gift and
invasion.
And an invasion. I mean, and that's the part that kind of grabbed me about that. The gift part makes sense, but the invasion. I mean, how are we invasive with our empathy sometimes as nurses, do you think?
I mean, I think that there's a trap of over empathizing. There was I had a patient recently, and he was, it's kind of like he's like a difficult end of life patient. He didn't want to talk to anybody. He was kind of kicking everybody out. He was really grumpy and mean and insulting and all the stuff and da. And when we actually kind of had a moment to connect and we kind of like broke through the barriers, he told me kind of what was going on. And he said his roommate of 3 years had died that week, and he was alone in this room with him all night long, right? Just sitting there, like didn't have a way to call for help, just was in this experience of, I'm at the end of my life. I'm really old. I just went through this terrible experience. And for me as a listener, I can reflect on different parts of my life where I would have carried that home and it would have broken my heart. I mean, I would have lost sleep. I would have just cried. I would have, tried to like almost purge that experience for him on his behalf, because that is, I mean, we can relate to that, right? We can insert ourselves into these experiences and we can feel the fullness of someone else's humanity. And I think the challenge is to be able to try it on, right? To be able to be with it and to observe it, to almost like put it on temporarily and, meet that person there, but then to like disrobe it, to take it off so that it doesn't become part of your waking reality, so that it isn't just every moment of your life is kind of clouded by the collective, aggregated suffering that humans are experiencing. That's happening all the time, but there's also joy that's happening all the time, and there's magical experiences and happiness and carefree things that are happening all the time, but we're just not exposed to that in the same way. So having some kind of protections around that, or maybe reality checks around that, when we're choosing to work in really strong energies and heavy energies, like you gotta have plans to bring in more light, or you kind of just get smushed.
And I appreciate what you're saying about the older gentleman, because there's a kind of conditionality that we show up with our care sometimes. Like if you're pleasant, if you're nice, then I'll look after you. But if you're a dick, then I'm gonna be aloof. And and what are we communicating with that, right? What are we saying that like you're only worthy when you're pleasant?
Totally.
When you're a convenient patient who doesn't ring the bell too much.
Totally.
Like, is that when you're good, or is all of you okay? I mean, that's really like empathy 2.0, right?
Right. Empathy 2.0.
So there's lots of questions coming in about training. I want to point people to our website, opennurses.org. There is a whole page on there that we've tried to aggregate all the different training programs that are out there, with the caveat that this is still very much an early field. And, we don't even have a official certification yet. Credentialing, that's in process of being developed. All these programs have variance in what they teach because there's no across the board accreditation, unlike when you went to nursing school, for example. So this is kind of a perennial question that Rebecca's asking about. Do you foresee needing an advanced degree to be involved? And is there any chatter in nursing about a governing board or body for psychedelic nurses? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I emphatic no about advanced degrees being required as points of entry into psychedelics. And in fact, I think the more nurses we can get into psychedelics with LVNs, RNs, BSNs, like the better. Not required to be doing the work. It just would depend on if there's a desire to do prescribing and med management, or maybe work your way up in research or some other things where an advanced degree would be probably required for what you desire. I don't know anything about the governing body. I haven't heard, any particular insights about nursing and psychedelics. I don't know if that's something that you're aware of, Andrew, and in your field, but I haven't heard anything about that.
Yeah, I'm working on that from the inside.
You're the guy.
Well, I'm not the guy, but I'm a guy trying to make sure that nurses are represented at the table. So I don't want us playing catch up like we often do in our field.
Right. Yeah, totally.
Let's be here at the beginning.
Yeah, that's right. And, practicing at the top of our license now instead of waiting for an invitation or permission. Like, just don't ask for a blessing. Just
that's right. Take a seat at the table and start talking.
Yeah.
Don't wait for an invitation. It might not happen. So Angela's asking, what are some of the other skills that nurses might develop to help with supporting psychedelic patients?
Well, so besides our factory programming, I think, there's a couple of models. I know we don't have too much time left. There's a model. There's actually some competencies that Billy Rosas wrote about, Billy Rosa, and it was in an article about palliative care, 10 things palliative care docs should know about psychedelic assisted psychotherapy in the context of serious illness. And
great article. Yeah.
It's really good. It's really good. He mentions 4 competencies: therapeutic presence, which we have in droves, self-awareness, self-reflection, which is that's going to be the commitment, the ongoing work forever. If you're in any type of healing arts, is just to have this insight. But the 4th, which I think is probably the most important, is just healing practices. And it just has to do with kind of personal spiritual attunement, because for the first time, healthcare, these models, whether it's end of life or whether it's psychedelic, we are going to do a major disservice if we don't have some sort of fluency in not just, the science realm, but in kind of the spiritual realm. And you don't have to be, 100% fluent in both languages. You don't have to be a physician and a shaman, right? Or like a Buddhist, but to have some personal practices and to have some sort of experiences that can help you to stay grounded, to explore these altered states of consciousness, and to get through kind of the work, everything that comes after, having kind of your top blown open and these new states of consciousness, I think is super duper important. So practices.
Yeah. I mean, the more I think about psychedelic dressing changes, the more
I love this.
I mean, everyone's sort of talking about this day that hasn't come yet, but you can start doing this now, right? You don't need ketamine, you don't need psilocybin.
Yeah.
If what we are really highlighting as nurses is our quality of presence and care, well, you can do that with any population right now tonight.
Yep.
How do you do your change of shift assessment in a way that's more attentive and more present and less rote, and really tunes into somebody? That's psychedelic, right? It doesn't have to
be psychedelic. And the more you are in that frame of mind of, I am practicing this, I am being mindful about this care delivery,
right?
The better, the more intuitive, the more native it is.
Yeah. You don't need ambient music and a salt lamp for this to be psychedelic therapy. Okay. I think there was another question that came up there. Hello, I'm a nursing student from Seattle, Xanthia. Thank you. Can nurses suggest to patients these alternative treatment modalities? I assume by that you mean psychedelics. I'm wondering where to draw the line when talking about psychedelics in healthcare. Are we going to get in trouble if we suggest psychedelics or we talk about psychedelics with patients? Is that going to...
I think a recommendation would be a really slippery slope. I think anytime we're coming with a solution and saying, hey, I think that this would be a good fit for you, and we're outside of being in a therapeutic relationship or being a prescriber with something legal, I think that could be a slippery slope. But there's conversations. If someone is coming to you with a question about alternative therapies, psychedelic or not, like that can just be part of the conversation. And in all of energy medicine and all of the, here are all of the things that you could read more about if you're interested. And here are some of the websites and here are some of the things I've heard about. I couldn't recommend those things. I don't know. But I would caution anyone about making a direct recommendation for behavior. Just because one, we want people to come up with their own solutions and follow their own paths independently. But until, Amnesty Day, as it's been put, it would be probably maybe a little bit of getting yourself into the crosshairs, I think.
And of course, ketamine, one can obtain that through legal channels. So, that's always an option if you're uncomfortable talking about things that are not yet approved, such as psilocybin and such. And I guess I would also add to what you're saying is to engage in curiosity. Tell me more about tell me more about what interests you about that. What speaks to you. So if I'm a patient working with you on passage projects or on ketamine journey, what's that going to look like? What are we going to do together?
Well, the point of entry isn't necessarily ketamine. So Passage Projects is just where I can kind of deliver the Anna services. So you may come in just wanting a death doula and wanting some more holistic death support and wanting some, training for your family, which is essentially psychedelic training for a family. Like, how do you consider set and setting, and how do you attune to the energy of someone that can't talk to you? And it's super psychedelic training. For the right person, for the right fit, if they are wanting to have a conscious death experience or, even a practice death experience, then we could talk about having a ketamine journey together. And that would just mean going to the provider that I work with and having an evaluation and clearance, just like anyone normally would for ketamine, and then coming into a framework with me, which is this nurse doula model, which is a bit of a departure from perhaps some of the other ketamine models that are happening.
How is it different? How's it different?
Well, I think, there's a number of different ketamine modalities, right, that are happening from, infusion lounges to like physician delivered to a 3-hour session, with an oral lozenge with a therapist where you're actively kind of going into the therapy space. But, what I bring in the patients that want to work with me are looking for just that kind of deep presence. They're looking for that nursing intuition. They're looking for a doula that's just going to be kind of there, holding space, guiding, and letting you be the midwife of your own experience, and letting whatever comes up in a really like non-directed way. Like we're not digging for childhood trauma, right? We're just in this space, this collaboration together, and like I will be here to keep you safe for whatever comes up, and really then just having some flexibility that we can build and customize a plan after that, depending on what someone needs, whether that's just more death supports, whether that's, some sort of like bringing in rituals or legacy planning or, aromatherapy or, body work or sound healing or more ketamine sessions or, I'm going to include my therapy colleagues and go do some therapy as well. So there's an option to really like customize what this care model kind of looks like. And I think a nurse doula model gives some agility to how it can be.
Yeah, we're not painted into one corner of how treatment is supposed to look like, or care is supposed to look like. This is a pretty broad question, but so you can take it as you like. Why do you think ketamine's therapeutic? What is it about it?
I mean, that's the mystery, right? I think, ketamine and other psychedelics give us this opportunity to access, wisdom and knowing and remembering. And I think sometimes that's the kind of key and lock moment is, I don't necessarily lead with like what's happening on a physiologic perspective, but just there's access to these moments that may be useful, that may be kind of like pivotal changes to your consciousness or to your way of thinking, or strictly just remembering something that we've kind of fallen away from.
When I think about remembering, I think about rejoining. Like we dismember, cut apart, and remembering is like bringing back together.
Absolutely.
Like I've always wondered what recreational drugs recreate, but that's a different conversation. Well, I know we're getting close to the end here, but I think I got a couple more questions if you would indulge us in a few more minutes of your time. But you started your own business, which a lot of nurses only work for hospitals or healthcare systems. So, to be a nurse entrepreneur, what sort of challenges did you run into, and what'd you learn from that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, boy, it's been really, it's been an opportunity for stretching in all the ways, because I think a lot of the nursing tendency is to kind of follow prescribed, we follow orders, right? We kind of like have this system figured out. And so I've had a lot of growth edges that I've had to encounter in starting a business. And part of that is just getting clear on what the offering is. So getting clear on what the offering is and then starting to say it out loud, which in the first couple of years feels a little impostery, right? It feels like a little pretend, and like you can be a nurse plus. So nursing is the scaffolding from which I build everything, but the services I offer aren't strictly about nursing. And I think there's this opportunity that if you would like to, you can customize a practice or a business that allows you the flexibility to be a nurse plus or a nurse and it's important to kind of find your champions and to find other people that are doing similar work, because it feels like, I always think of like, there are these videos of like dogs wearing shoes and they don't know how to walk. And it's like, they have this 404 total system shutdown. And sometimes that's how I feel. I don't know how someone guide me. But so, I'm not the first person to do this. There's counsel everywhere. And once you kind of hang a shingle, you can start with what you know and then be willing to pivot quickly and just change on what you learn and what seems to be the need, what people are asking for, and just to be nimble, just to be willing to do a lot of small decisions frequently instead of one massive decision at the same time.
There's a golden retriever at the the park where I take my dog to that wears it. Its owner has him wearing pink Crocs, dog Crocs, which I.
Why?
Yeah. It's a sight. Okay, I think this might be the last question here. How's the oncology community, both people with cancer, living with cancer, and oncology providers, embrace death doulas and the use of psychedelics? And are we rebranding death and dying with our approach, or what? How's that being received by that world?
I mean, there's a lot of curiosity, and I attribute this to be the sea change seems to be post-COVID. There weren't conversations happening like this before COVID. There weren't people that were curious about kind of what's going on over there, what's happening, and this confronting experience of COVID with people seeing a highly medicalized, high technology death, like even if they don't know what they want theirs to look like, that's not it. And so there's definitely been a sea change. There's been a lot more conversations happening. There's a lot more receptivity about unmedicalizing death. And we don't really know what that looks like yet, and we don't really know how to create some sort of collective shift around that, or how to perpetuate that without having like a shared vision of what that looks like. So I think that'll happen in small ways over time. And I think it'll mostly be related to, well, maybe not mostly, but in part related to clinicians' storytelling about what they're learning and about what they're unlearning. So if a clinician is experiencing like a mystical death or a natural death and seeing a death without interventions, like, we have an obligation to kind of tell that story and to give that choice to people, and to do our part to almost like move the needle in these small ways with these interactions that we have.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of receptivity to death doulas right now. And I think death doulas will fill in all of the gaps. So all of the things that, providers may not have time to do, but are interested in supporting, there can be some really amazing collaborations. And my wish and my hope is that there can be a very routine interdisciplinary connection between, palliative or hospice end of life groups partnering and paying death doulas who are truly wisdom keepers and experts in going into these spaces. And I think they'll be super fundamentally important in psychedelic execution as well. But this just takes time, right? Like, it's starting to happen. And just being willing to step into new potentials is really important. Just what could be, what haven't we figured out yet?
Right. And I love that idea that we don't have to know the answers to the questions to enter into the space, but really we're living into the questions, right? All right, last question. This is kind of our traditional ending here. If you could go back and talk to young Anna, what advice would you give your younger self?
Yep. I would tell baby Anna to stop knocking on closed doors and look for open windows. Yeah.
Open windows.
Yep. So, if something seems like it's going to be a non-starter, don't spend time there trying to make a case or coerce. Just find the open windows and seize those opportunities instead.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, Anna, I knew from the minute we met in Austin that this would be an exciting conversation, and that has proven to be true. So thank you so much for taking part of your evening and spending it with us. There's been a lot of questions and comments in the sidebar, which is always a great sign that you're lighting people up. So thank you for being an inspiration and for all the good work that you're doing, blazing this trail in the end of life work and all the work you're doing. So thank you for being here. And this will be for, if you have friends that couldn't make it to this live, this will be on our YouTube channel for later observation, and for the historical record, which we are creating history as we speak right now. So thank you for being part of it.
Thank you so much, Andrew. This has been a delight, and thank you so much for your contributions.
All right. Until next time, folks, keep an eye out for our announcements for our next Psychedelic Chat, and we'll see you next time.